Other things to be thinking about that now that we had the invasion today of Ukraine with Russia, and I see some other things right on its heels. I see China being emboldened and going into Taiwan. I see even Iran deciding that they want to push some of their initiatives into Syria and some others. So there's a lot of our enemies that are working together in concert. And the question is, how will that affect us here? I put some notes together to make sure I cover everything, but there's some cool stuff I want to go through. First of all, I want to talk about concerns from most likely to most devastating. The challenges, the things that people should, some people are some of the crazies out there that you'll see on Doomsday Prepper or whatever else. I'm preparing for the Yellowstone volcano to go off. Well, you know what? That's a 1 in 600 million chance.
Yeah, right? And that goes off, we're all dead anyway, right?
Exactly. Or I'm preparing for an asteroid that took out the dinosaurs. Well, that happens about 1 every 100 million years, right? So in terms of natural disasters here in the Wasatch Front, a 7.0 earthquake or above, we're at about a 50% chance of that happening in our lifetime, in you and I's lifetime, in the next 20 years or less, right? So that's something to be thinking about. But from a world stage standpoint and the things that we're seeing going on right now, those are the things I want to talk about more specifically. And I want to preface it with this. It's so important to understand that in the United States, we're in a very precarious position because of our just-in-time economy that we live in, okay? Meaning, when you run out of milk, you go pick it up right now. It's there. In fact, there's only enough food in the grocery stores to sustain the average city in the U.S., there's only enough food to sustain them for about 3 days. And if something bad falls apart, that food disappears in a few hours, okay? So 3 days, we're 9 meals away from anarchy. And the reason this is so important to understand is that in the United States, unlike most other countries in the world, in the United States, there's the 90% of the food that is consumed in every major city, 90% of that food is grown more than 100 miles away or produced more than 100 miles away from that city. So less than 10% of the food. So if something happens where we have supply chain disruptions, and this is a big buzzword out there that we're seeing because of some of the vaccine mandates, some of the trucker strikes, some of the list goes on, but there's supply chain disruptions in microprocessing chips, so we can't get the Ford trucks that we wanted. This is why used ones are more expensive than new ones right now, or whatever. There's so many different small things. The thing that we need to be concerned about is if those supply chain disruptions end up disrupting our ability to get food to the grocery stores and thereby to your home and to your family in a timely manner. And there's a number of different things that could create that. Not only the COVID restrictions, widespread looting, and whatnot. Other things, a dollar crash, a financial crash, hyperinflation. When I was a kid, I used to play Monopoly with my sisters. And we realized that if we waited to pass go to get our $200, it was going to take a long time to get enough money to buy all the hotels we wanted, right? So we had this brilliant idea. We were going to take the money that was, instead of starting with what they said, we're going to give each other a whole bunch more to start with, right? And then when we bought something, instead of putting the money in the bank, we put the money in the middle of the board. And then if we landed on free parking, whoever landed on free parking got all that money in the middle of the board. Now we had a whole bunch of money. Now, the 15 minutes into the game, we were all wealthy and the bank was broke, right? We created something called hyperinflation. What happens is I own Boardwalk. My sister buys Park Place, and she pays, what was it, $250, $300 for it? I offer her $7,000 for Park Place, right? Why? Because that's the only thing that would catch her attention, because she had cash, I had cash, etc. Did the value of that go up 20x in one turn? No. It's because of the amount of funny money that was in the game. Before 2008, the 2008 crisis, we in Bridge were watching some of the things that were happening, and we had some financial analysts that were there on our team. And what happened before that time is that there was $800 billion bills chasing $800 billion worth of goods and services. Then the 2008 crisis hit, and people were worried we were going to go back into another depression because there was so many signs pointing to it. So the feds have two levers to work with. One of them is lowering interest rates, and one of them is printing more money, right? So they lower interest rates almost to zero, and then they start printing money. They have something called quantitative easing, QE. QE1, QE2, QE3, QE4. By the end of 2010, we had $4.5 trillion chasing the same goods and services that we had $800 billion. Mm-hmm. The only reason why a gallon of milk didn't cost $36 is that the money multiplier was still below 1. This is the number of times that the money is changing hands, et cetera. So I'm not going to go into a lot of extra details on that, but I will say that with trillions of dollars every other month that's being announced as new money that's being printed into the system, it's inevitable that we're going to have some financial challenges, whether that's a hyperinflation, whether that's a dollar reset, whether there's a whole bunch of different things that could lead to, but none of them are good. If you're a government and want to spend an extra $1 trillion more than you taxed, you have two choices. You either tax everybody that extra $1 trillion and piss everybody off, or you print an extra $1 trillion, which takes it so that anybody who has savings, my parents have worked their whole life, they have enough money to retire, they're just fine there. But if that couple $1 million that they have doesn't have the same buying power, if it has the buying power of 100,000, now they're in trouble. Now anybody who's got that savings and the reality is, if you as the government wanted to push this narrative out to the people and justify it to the masses, you could easily say, listen, we're going to take 2 decimal places off your dollar. So instead of $1 million in your bank account, you only have $10,000 in there. It's okay. We're only hurting the rich. The ultra wealthy are going to be the ones that get hurt. You as Mr. I've got a blue collar job type of a thing and a $200,000 mortgage. Guess what? Taking 2 decimals off your mortgage is now worth $2,000 instead of $200,000, right? It's inflation-induced debt destruction is what would happen, and that would bode well to the majority of Americans that are in debt. The challenge is if you've got a bunch of cash and now it's not worth anything, that you have some challenges. So it's important to kind of understand how that could work.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you shared that because it's when they started handing out the stimulus money and the trillions of dollars that they were pouring into it, what people were celebrating a $1,200 check. What they didn't understand is it didn't take more than a couple of weeks for all that money to be back in the hands of the business owners and the rich. In the meanwhile, I think the actual inflation, they're showing a stat, or what they're saying is like 5.6% or whatever, but it's really closer to 9 or 10% from what I've, the people I've listened to. And so every $100 you had in your savings account is now worth 90. And ultimately that all catches up with, it's kind of like they've moved the levers as far as they can. The only thing left now is to break the lever, right? I mean, they've pushed the lever as far as it's able to go.
Absolutely. So that's a big thing to be thinking about is putting your assets in a place where they can be protected during.
What are a couple of the best assets to put
well,
into?
I like tangible things. I like gold. I like silver. Here's the thing. Let's talk about gold, silver, and let's say stones, diamonds or rubies or whatever else. You can a couple $100,000 worth of silver. You're gonna weigh down the back of your truck, right? A couple $100,000 worth of gold you could hold in your hand. A couple $100,000 worth of diamonds you can sew in your sock. Now, the challenge with diamonds is that there's a lot of new technology that's making almost perfect diamonds, and it's driving for the first time in our lifetimes. The price of diamonds has not gone up every year, and it's dipped the last couple of years. But it is something that you can take a tangible asset and not have to be carrying a whole bunch of stuff type of a thing. So those are solid. I like cash flowing assets. If you've got a business that has, for example, I invested in a vodka company. pure vodka out of Canada. They're kicking butt right now. Things get bad, and people buy vodka in good times and bad. Booze and bullets do really good in both. And on that note, bullets are a great thing. They're a barter item. They're something that's ammunition and guns, etc. Are things that are always going to stay strong unless everybody decides to just turn them in and they get confiscated, which that will be a really sad day. But back on the booze side, or any company that people will still be spending money on, whether it's inflation or not, is something where you can ratchet up the prices to match inflation and you'll have an income no matter what. So whether it's a hard asset or whether it's a cash flowing asset, if it's something that can cash flow, you've got a whole bunch of rental houses and things like that, people are still going to need a place to stay.
Right.
So that's something that as long as they're not locked in to a specific rate for the next 20 years, you can adjust that with inflation, and it's something that can cash flow okay for you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So into Taiwan, I see even Iran deciding that they want to push some of their initiatives into Syria and some others. So there's a lot of our enemies that are working together in concert, and the question is, how will that affect us here? There's a very real possibility of a cyber attack. In fact, Russia has already said that if we try to interfere at all, then that will happen. What does that look like? A cyber attack on our infrastructure could be a cyber attack on our banking system. This is another reason that all of your cash sitting in a bank account, not only from a dollar reset standpoint, but if everything is electronically just sitting there with ones and zeros on it, that's something that could be taken down in a successful cyber attack. Or other parts of our infrastructure include things like our communications, our water, even the electric grid. And this is something that very few people really understand how precarious of a predicament we have put ourselves in here in the U.S. Of the 18 critical infrastructures in the United States, 17 of those 18 rely upon one, which is our electric grid. If that goes down and stays down, we've got some really serious problems.
What would that look like? How would they even take down the electric grid?
There's a number of different ways to do it. From a cyber attack standpoint, we've already found hundreds of different cases where they have embedded some sleeper software that could be turned on at a very specific time that would make it so that our different parts of the grid would go and against each other and blow the transistors and things like that. Those transistors are 1 to 2 years to be able to get replaced, and they're manufactured in Korea. Oh, right? Shit. Now, some more tactical ways outside of a cyber attack that they could do it is something called an EMP. And if you don't understand what that is, it's an electromagnetic pulse. It's something that can be deployed on individual cities or something that could be done nationwide. In fact, if somebody was able to launch a nuclear warhead specifically designed as a super EMP warhead and have it explode a few hundred miles above the surface of the Earth, then it would send out something called a Carrington event, about 100,000 volts of electricity going out all directions, about 1,000 miles each direction, which would take out all electronics. It would take out our grid. It would fry all of our cell phones, everything, depending on where you are in relation to that. There's something called a coronal mass ejection from the sun. This is something away from our enemies. Every 11 years, the sun goes through a cycle that is significantly stronger. In fact, Glenn Beck did a piece on this about 3 weeks ago, where he talked about the solar flares from the sun are increasing this year and next year significantly higher than they've been for many, many years. And there's a lot of other things going on from an electronic standpoint here on Earth that's not making it so we're not as protected like we were before. And in the mid-1800s, the sun released one that took out all electronics on Earth, which was at the time just telegraph machines, boop, 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 and it fried them. They were all done. If that same thing happened today, we would be in a serious situation. Now, the sun releases strong enough ones to take out all electronics on Earth all the time. But the sun's here, the Earth's over here, it goes out this way. There's just not only 360 different directions, thousands of different directions that it could go that it wouldn't hit the Earth. But go in the direction of the Earth, once that happens, could be just like a super EMP. And so I was talking to a good friend of mine, Chris Stewart is our congressman in Washington, D.C., does a great job, was on the Intelligence Committee in D.C., and he gets information on the Intelligence Committee. If there's something important enough to take to the rest of Congress, he goes in and helps take care of that. Well, he gets briefed on a lot of the crap going on. And I was at lunch with him, and I asked him, I says, Chris, tell me, what are you most concerned about? And he said, Paul, he said, attacks on our infrastructure from a cyber attack standpoint or an EMP or anything else, he said it should be something you should be strongly considering. He says if the problem, especially concerning cyber attacks, if the problem was the size of a loaf of bread 5 years ago, it's the size of an NBA stadium today.
Wow.
He said it's something we need to really be concerned about. And you need to think, there was a book that he suggested to me called 1 Second After. In fact, he wrote a series of books that have an EMP in it. But in that book, it really helped open up my eyes as to all of the things that we depend on: refrigeration and transportation and communication. I mean, the list goes on.
Because of electricity, and all the vehicles that aren't like those old trucks and cars would work fine, but anything from what you're on would just be fried and not available.
with an EMP type of a thing.
Right.
I will say this: a lot of experts say that an EMP strong enough to take out things in your car or your cell phone or things like that, you'd have to be within a 300-mile radius of where that EMP goes. If you're further away than 300, then it just takes out the grid. But if the grid goes down, how are you going to pump your gas? Right? And if the grid goes down, the electricity required to purify, clean the water and whatnot in most cities is something where a lot of cities have a big tank up high where they have to pump the water up to it and then have it come down gravity. 3 days later, that stops dripping. So your refrigeration is done. And your furnace, if there's no electricity at all, it may how are you going to have your electric light on your? So there's a lot of things that in your house aren't going to work if the grid is down.